Today we are going to be doing a little bit of philosophy. I have three highly dense, compacted questions, and the objective of this video is to try to work through it in real time. I haven't answered these questions. I've done a little bit of research beforehand, but I told ChatGPT to give me like three dense questions. So it says here are three dense, concrete, high friction questions that compress everything we've discussed: game theory, heuristics, technology, education, identity, power, in one thinking challenge each. These are not prompts, they are not problems. Answering them forces visible reasoning, trade-offs, and self-correction. So the first one says strategy and responsibility. In a system where responsibility, effort, and honesty are evenly rewarded, how do you decide whether to A, keep playing optimally within the rules, B, deliberately lower your visible competence, or C, attempt to change the game itself? What concrete signal tells you that your current strategy has stopped being evolutionary stable? So this is game theory, dominant strategy, signaling, equilibrium breakdown. So signaling is an interesting topic here because it talks, and I'm going to try to keep all of these questions under 10 minutes. So this video should not exceed 30 minutes. But signaling is differentiated from noise, where noise is just basically verbosity. It's just information that is either redundant or that has no real new information, while signaling is new information, are things or words or ideas that can change the outcome of certain actions, right? So what this question is basically asking is, in a system where responsibility, effort, and honesty are unevenly rewarded, how do you decide basically which one to go for, right? So responsibility, effort, and honesty, and then it says, how do you decide whether to keep playing optimally within the rules, deliberately lower your visible competence, or attempt to change the game itself? Well, first of all, if you deliberately lower your visible competence, it doesn't mean that you're being less competent. It means that you're not being as visible. You can still be competently invisible. That is, you can do things without others seeing that you're doing them and still be getting the same results or even better results, right? So that's something that could be considered there. Keep playing optimally within the rules. I think rules were meant to be broken. No. But I think what happens with rules is they only work when other people enforce them. If there's no one to enforce the rules, then people won't be they won't be, what do they call it, rewarded? No, they won't want to follow them, basically. So the idea here, there's another idea that in order to follow rules, you have to see the benefit visibly that it gives you, right? So if you don't see that, or there really is no benefit, and there's no positive reinforcement, there's no benefit, visibly benefit or visible, normally short-term benefit, and there is also no enforcement, there's no negative reinforcement, there's no consequence, there's no bad outcome for not following the rules, then people don't follow the rules, right? So I think you shouldn't play optimally within the rules if they're neither being reinforced nor benefiting you in some way, right? Now, attempting to change the game itself is, I think, what everybody is trying to do, right? Because this is going to benefit you. I think, well, not everybody, but I think it's unconsciously what everybody's trying to do when you're trying to get your way, so to say. So if you say, I want things to happen this or that way, and you try to make that happen, that's you changing the circumstances. And if you see that you're able to change certain circumstances, which more often than not, you're not, but if you do see that you're able to change certain circumstances, then you'll eventually work towards the whole framework, towards the whole general perception of how things work. And that's what will benefit you, because then you'll be making the structure in which you will be able to benefit all of the time, so to say, right? Now, responsibility, effort, and honesty are different because responsibility is based on principles, and you can either be getting rewarded or not. but still be responsible. There could be someone that has a shit job, for example, but they're still responsible because that's their principle, because that's how they were brought up, because that's what they learned, right? Effort has, see, you can be responsible superficially. I think responsibility is a very superficial, or has become a very superficial idea, because as long as you show up on time, you do the minimum requirement, the minimum required work, and you don't rock the boat, you're considered responsible to your boss. That's a responsible person, right? They come in, they do their work, they don't bother anybody, and they leave, right? And they're here on time. That's responsibility, right? It's a very uh, shallow, superficial idea. Effort, on the other hand, has to do more with what you actually want to get done. It has to do with you, in a way, going the extra mile, or seeing what extra activities you can do when they're not really obligated, right? And honesty, of course, deals directly with effort, because you can be honest about the effort that you're putting in, right? Um, I don't know. This question, I feel like it's not really formulated very well. I kind of feel like it's kind of unstable. It's not really standing on all four legs. But yeah, so I would say, and what concrete signal tells you that your current strategy has stopped being evolutionarily stable? Um, I think the concrete signal that tells you that your current strategy has stopped being evolutionarily stable, mm, is, well, we can think of it from two perspectives. First of all, from the social perspective, and second of all, from the individual perspective. So what happens, I think, first is you start to feel bad. You start to feel outcasted, right? Or you feel like an outcast socially. So you don't fit in, right? Maybe you've never fit in, and that's already a concrete signal that tells you that your current strategy has stopped being evolutionarily stable. And in this case, that's the first thing. So you feel bad, but see, that correlates directly with the social, with the social point, because why do you feel bad? But well, because you have no girlfriend, no boyfriend, because you don't have friends, because you don't have significant relationships, etc. Right? So I think that's the way in which you're able to tell that. See, this is what I said in one of my videos where I spoke about how to get a boyfriend and how to get a girlfriend. You need to change your outlook. You need, not your outlook. You need to change your physical appearance. So, what I did was get a haircut. And you need to do things that don't go with who you are to a certain extent. So you need to kind of be fake to fit in, and that's part of the game. You need to play the game. You need to become a player. You need to put on the uniform. You need to learn the rules. You need to participate, right? You can't just be yourself, because if you're yourself all of the time, you're going to be sitting on the bench, right? So in order to play the game, you need to participate, and you need to act the part, right? And there's a certain level of hypocrisy in it, sure, but you could say, well, I like being me. And I can tell you, well, in the beginning, before you were you, you pretended to be you, right? If you're this introvert, when you were a kid, maybe you weren't an introvert, but then you became an introvert. And as you were becoming, you were faking it, right? So you've always been faking in order to get into certain roles anyway. So, whatever. What I did, as I mentioned in those videos, is I got a haircut, because I used to have like really long, freakishly long hair, because I liked it like that. Not long, but up like shoulder length. And I started to wear cologne again, and dress kind of nicer, and so I feel like that's important, right? Superficially, so that's how you adapt your current strategy, or that's how you actualize or upgrade or update your strategy, right? So it can still be evolutionarily stable. Okay, let's go with the second question. This is on heuristics, rationality, and technology. If heuristics are fast, adaptive responses, excuse me, to complex environments, rather than logical errors? How should a rational person decide when to trust a heuristic, override it with analysis, or outsource the decision to technology, especially knowing that technologies reshape incentives? Oh, yeah, that was the word, incentivize incentives, and slowly redefine what rational even means. This is heuristics versus analysis, philosophy of technology, bounded rationality. So, heuristics is, I believe, either first or second process of thought. You have two processes of thought. You have a fast one and a slow one. Most of the time, we're operating on the fast one, which is automatic. So, like when you drive, when you make a quick decision, when you get up in the morning, when you make breakfast, when that's the fast heuristic one. Heuristics are, they call them bridges, but they're like shortcut. Well, they call them shortcuts. They're ways of thinking that don't require a lot of effort, right? So you just say, there's traffic on lane one, I'm going to move to lane two, right? That's a heuristic. So it's like there's no analysis, there's no deliberation. It's not slow, it's fast, right? Now, the other way of thinking is slow. That's analytical, that's reflective. It's what you do when you do philosophy. It's what you do when you have a big problem you need to solve and you need to think of different alternatives. There is no right, obvious decision. So you need to think, you need to talk it over with people. It's when you talk about your emotions, you use the slow thought process. So we have those two types of thought processes. In this case, we're making the assumption, because that can also be debated, but we're making the assumption that heuristics are fast. That's why it says if heuristics are fast adaptive responses to complex environments rather than logical errors, how should a rational person decide when to trust a heuristic, override it with analysis, or outsource the decision to technology? Well, first and foremost, the obvious and evident answer here is if you have time, right? So if you have time to think, to ponder, to deliberate, to really think through a problem, especially in a complex environment, you should probably do it, right? Because you have that advantage. The problem is that not a lot of times do people have that advantage to really think through a problem, and they need to make decisions fast, right? Especially if you live like in a city and you go, let's say you go somewhere, there's a line of people waiting behind you, and it's like, do you want this or not, right? You need to make a quick decision, right? So typically, a rational person, I think most people consider ourselves rational. We trust heuristics when we need to, more than when we want to, right? So it's not, and again, it's based on social pressure. When do we override it with analysis? I wouldn't say we override it with analysis, but we need to basically write it with analysis. We need to take a step back and think about whatever it is. We need to think about when we intuitively detect, when we intuitively infer or detect, or kind of just get the gist that there's risk, that there's higher risk than payoff, right? So it's basically more bad than good. It will do you more bad than good, right? So if like let's go back to that example, you're in line and you're deciding whether to buy this computer or not, right? And they actually say don't make decisions when you're being pressured, or when there's, because it could just be the salesperson trying to make the sale, right? Under like pressuring you, like yes or no, because this is a limited time offer, right? And you're like and you need the computer or whatever. But I would say if you detect, trust your gut instinct in this case, which is another heuristic, but I would say that's an emotional heuristic. And that would be interesting to see if, like, because how emotional are heuristics really? That's another question to analyze. But anyway, so you're there and you're trying to decide whether to buy this computer or not, and the guy's pressuring you, and you just get this feeling that you need to think it over. You may miss out on the opportunity, but the risk of buying that computer and losing a lot of money, or it being a bad computer, is higher, right? So you just say no. let but this is a limited time offer. There's a line, they're gonna be out of stock, whatever. I don't care. Like, I'll just leave, right? Unless you really do think you will get a higher benefit, so you really need that computer or whatever. So I think that's when you need to override it. That's when again, that's when you need to trust a heuristic and maybe override it with analysis when you think there's a higher risk. Now, when do you outsource the decision to technology? Technology is interesting because I just recently spoke on this, and I think technology has, uh, well, first of all, nowadays we can just ask ChatGPT, like, what do you think of this? Should I get this? Should I do this? What decision should I make? Um, and technologies reshape incentives. Yes, you can say they reshape the framework. They can make us see things a different way, but so can another person, so can a therapist, right? So it's not really like this satanization or vilifying technology, like, oh, like technology is super bad, like it's the bad guy, it's the villain of the human history story. No, like, it's just another perspective, right? They can reshape incentives, yes, but so do marketing campaigns, so do ads, so do commercials, right? So outsourcing a decision to technology, I think, would be the same as outsourcing your decision to another person. Again, first and foremost is it's if you have time, if you're able to do that. If you're able to do that, then go ahead and do it, right? Which is the same as overriding it with analysis or just thinking through it. But yeah, this word is very interesting, outsourcing, right? Because if it seems like every day more and more, or as technology advances or progresses, or we get more technology, we outsource, right, our responsibilities, our duties, our actions to technology, for technology basically to do them, to the point where I spoke about this. We're even doing it now, like psycholinguistically, right, with AI, with ChatGPT, for example, with language models, and slowly redefine what rationality means. So, rationality in this case, we can see it as that which will see rationality, I think, is involved with two main components of reality. The first one is defining things just good enough for us to work with them, because we can get metaphysical and say there's no such thing really as a table because they're all atoms, whatever, which even that is using rationality to deconstruct rationality, right? But okay, it defines things, and it defines things in order so we can work with them. And in second place, what it does, or secondly, what it does is that rationality also helps us work through problems, problem solve, right? So rationality, I mean, we go back to this idea: how do you get a fast thought process? How are you able to make quick decisions on the highway or about your everyday life? Well, because you have experience, because of your past, because once you had to learn how to ride a bike, right? You had to use deliberate, slow process thought. And then eventually, through practice, through experience, through repetition, now you're able to make those decisions fast. So that's what we call experience. That's what we call mastery, right? Okay. And rationality, then we can just say, to summarize, redefining rationality has those two implications, but let's try to focus on that word, how to redefine it. If we're using AI or if we're using technology, we could say it's getting an upgrade. It's again being updated. And in what way is it being updated, and how will it affect things in the future? It's being updated because it's giving us more ideas, more thought processes, more variation. So it's actually making things more complex, interestingly enough. And that will mean that in the future, things will inevitably be more complex. See, one thing about complexity I see is that before, I think I was reading in this book on the consumer, the behavior of the consumer, broadly speaking, was that before you can just get like subsections of society, but like massively, and target them and sell to them, right? Like everybody wanted the same thing, or you could make people think that and sell them the same product, the same service. Excuse me. But now things are so diversified because everything is personalized, right? Interestingly enough, since everybody wants different things, everybody has different tastes, um, that makes it complex, right? Ultimately. So that's interesting. And question three, education, identity, and power. If education systems and digital platforms primarily train people to optimize for grades, visibility, and compliance rather than understanding, at what point does self discipline turn into self domestication? And how can an individual change their payoff structure without becoming socially or professionally non viable? So it's hidden games, moral trade offs, and identity as strategy. Um, so if again, not all education does this, but most, we can say most education does. Education systems and digital platforms primarily train people to optimize for grades, visibility, and compliance. You need to see people doing good, basically. So that's what we're talking about. And it's not so much focused on understanding. So compliance here is a big one because compliance leads you to be self-disciplined, right? You need to control your impulses and whatever you're feeling or whatever your wishes are or your desires are, in order to work in society, in civilization, right? So at what point does it turn into self domestication? That is into, see, I think self discipline and self domestication are very are pretty closely related. We can basically say they're the same thing, but I do see a difference. I detect the difference. Self-discipline, we can say, has a positive connotation because it's oriented towards virtue. Typically, this discipline is associated with virtue. So if you have self-discipline, it means that you're working towards improving yourself or improving systems or improving other people or improving and making something better by either adding things that are beneficial or subtracting things that are detrimental, right? So we can say that self domestication, we can say, is the same thing. So it's repetition, it's being disciplined, but it's being, we can say here, not determined like in self discipline, but stubborn. It's staying in the same place, right? Passively. So it's like you're working towards making yourself complacent entirely, right? Where you actually have no critical thinking, you don't really have wishes and desires, right? Because you've eliminated them completely since you've been so, how can we say? Yeah, and we need a balance, right? That's the idea also. We need, you can't be all like me and doing whatever you want, but you also can't let yourself be taken by the collective, right? You need to have your individuality. So you see the answer to that problem is sublimination. You need to make that which you want to do seem or make it acceptable in society. You need to see what you want to do, your wishes, your desires, your shadow, everything. You need to know yourself. That's why you need to know yourself. And then you need to be able to find a way to do that in the real world, right? Through a job, through being productive, etc., right? So at what point does self discipline turn into self domestication is the question. At what point? I think that's kind of hard because how does self discipline turn into self domestication? How do you get a person that's aiming for virtue? How do you get that person compliant, right? You would think not. I think you get that person compliant or domesticated. See, the point at which that happens is not between self discipline and self domestication. I think it happens before you become self disciplined. It becomes you become self-domesticated the moment that you choose to go in a direction that will eventually lead you to self-domestication, right? And you use self-discipline to actually domesticate yourself. How do you do that? Let's imagine you have two routes. You have this route which will teach you everything you need to know about philosophy, right? Let's say you study philosophy in the university, right? You go to a college and you study that. That's you, and you do a very good job in that course. That's you becoming self domesticated, because you can be self-disciplined all through your course, and then at the end just say, I know enough about philosophy to now chill, relax, and you become self-domesticated, right? You've been brainwashed by what you're supposed to know. You have a second route, or the other route, which is you learning about philosophy but on your own terms. So you can be self-disciplined in that sense, but that is not going to lead you to self-domestication, because you're going to ultimately be in charge of your own path, right? You can make it up as you go, so it's less uh, acceptable, we can say, by society, but it's still, I think, the better path, right? And I think you need to do this in early life, right? When you're young, you need to become domesticated, because you need to learn what other people expect, right? But then as you get older, you have the ability to shape things, to reframe them, to update them, to change them ultimately, right? And how can an individual change their own payoff structure without becoming socially or professionally non-viable? Mm, I think the way to do this is, so how can you change your own payoff structure, which means what you get in return, right? I give you this and I get this in return. And this, I think this is oriented towards something that I was talking with ChatGPT, where it says ChatGPT was telling me that I'm too available, right? And when a person's too available, their worth decreases. They become less valuable because you're so available, because you're so honest, because you're so transparent, which I don't care. That's the way I am. So I like being like that. But in order to do that, then you have to make, I think ChatGPT was telling me, not tell people that you're going to quit or stop doing something like your job, but make them think that you don't need this anymore, right? Like, I don't need to do this anymore. So that's when you become, uh, there's a shortage of you, right? And you become more valuable. So that's the first obvious element. But there was another question here. See, the first one has to do with outsourcing, which I found it to be very interesting. And this one has to do with with complacency. Yeah, with being compliant, with outsourcing. Yeah, the same thing, outsourcing things. And in this case, you can say you can change, a person can change their individual or their own payoff structure without becoming non-viable by doing it slowly. First of all, we can say, because if you get your things and say, I'm leaving, and you leave, right? People are just going to be like, okay, whatever, we'll just find someone else to replace you. Um, so you need to make yourself seem, not seem, but actually, well, one of the first things people say is make yourself be indispensable, right? And how do you make yourself be indispensable? By getting close to people, seeing what they need, and kind of being like a service person. So if you help people, which I think a lot of the humanities people, like doctors, psychologists, they say they get into the field to help people, right? Lawyers. So all of these abstract thinking individuals ultimately, well, I don't know if doctors are, but like psychologists, lawyers, they say, I got into this to help people, right? I don't know what like engineers say, but that's interesting, because eventually, as you get older, I think you stop wanting to help people, so you stop being oriented towards the service, and you see things, you see the structure for what it is, and that kind of makes you lose hope, right? And you just see things as being a pure bureaucratic process. So to answer the question, how can an individual, so if someone were to ask me, how can I change my payoff structure without becoming socially and professionally non-viable, I would say you either want more or you want less, right? If you want more, you need to make yourself more valuable. If you want less, which I don't think you do, make yourself less valuable. What if perceiving or making yourself appear to be less is actually how you get more? I don't know. But in order to make yourself at first glance more valuable, um, that's how you're going to change your payoff structure, making yourself more valuable and being more in service, I believe, which can be done, which I still do when I need to do it. Mm, Yeah, and it actually goes hand in hand, right? Because if you become more valuable, you become more socially or professionally viable, which I don't know if I'm understanding viable here, but non-viable, I understand it as that. But yeah, anyway, I think that's the way to do it. So that's all I got for now, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.